Hey guys, it's Nate. Today we're going to be diving into the process of building this amazing epoxy river desk. So let's begin. So another video on my channel goes into a comprehensive breakdown of the prep work that it took to get up to actually pouring the epoxy. So if you're interested in learning tips and tricks about how to make a form, the proper steps in sealing and making sure that your slabs are to size before actually putting them in the forms, go check that video out right here. But let's hop into actually getting ready for the epoxy pours. So this video is going to be part one in a series that breaks down a couple of the major parts of a epoxy river table or desk or whatever project that you want to make out of epoxy. So in the later videos we're going to be talking about later processes like the sanding or the flood coat, and actually the table here, while the top of it is finished, we have some legs that we're going to be fabricating and actually a keyboard tray that's going to go down here for recording some music. So that isn't done yet, so as I keep completing those projects I'll keep adding those videos to kind of show you a step-by-step guide to actually this finished product. So the end of the comprehensive video shows a picture, this one. The importance of this is making sure that you have a good clamp down, which ensures a good seal of your live edge slabs. What that does is it allows your slabs to be in the same orientation. Typically they're going to be flat, so if everything is clamped down correctly, you should have a nice flat surface to adhere to when you're actually pouring the epoxy. And then that makes sure that both slabs are unlevel between the two surfaces. So there's three products that I would recommend using with your melamine form, and that's silicone to seal all the edges and corners. Second will be Tyvek tape, and what you can do with that is put it everywhere that the slab or epoxy is going to be touching. For my case, I really only put it where the epoxy was going to be touching, but if I was going to do it again, I would definitely put it all over the place. And then third is a silicone or casting lubricant to spray on top of the form after you put the Tyvek tape on, and that will help to make sure that the epoxy and the slabs that you're using in your form don't adhere to it once the epoxy is fully cured and you're ready to actually take it out of the form. So there's actually two different types of epoxies that are used in this. For right now, what you can see, the main pour was actually done in a deep pour epoxy, which explains exactly what that is. It's used for deep, high volume pours of epoxy, whereas the top is actually called a tabletop or bar top epoxy, which same kind of thing. It explains what it is. It's just a top, hard, durable surface that's used. So make sure that if you're thinking about doing a project like this, to purchase the right type of epoxy for your project. So we use Wisebond epoxy for both the deep pour and the tabletop. And the one thing I would say is definitely follow your specific epoxy brand's directions to a T. It's very important because different manufacturers have different things, so don't read one manufacturer's directions and then decide to do it for yours. I actually did a couple different mini pours to allow myself to kind of get a better understanding of how the color is going to look in the final product. And since it was my first time doing this, I really wanted to get an understanding of how this was going to work, so I didn't have to kind of work on the fly when I was doing my major pour, which actually ended up happening anyway. But if this is your first time or if you're practicing with metallic pigment, I would definitely say kind of get an understanding of what the final color is going to be, and that kind of helped me decide how far I wanted to go with how much pigment to the volume of epoxy that I poured. This is our pour of epoxy.
If you haven't already, like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications for my new videos. Also comment below with any questions with the build, and if you have or plan to work with epoxy for any upcoming projects.
This is the first layer that we did. So we did this project in two layers. We did a bottom pigmented layer, which is about 1/2 inch, and then a top clear coat layer, which is about a full inch.
In the description, you can find a list of links for all the materials used in this video and for the build.
When you're doing the bottom layer, we realized that when we were pouring it, it wasn't nearly as dark enough. Like I kind of mentioned when I was trying out the pigments, it wasn't nearly dark enough when I first did it. So we had to kind of create extra amounts of epoxy that were very heavy in pigment and then poured it in once again and kind of mixed it around to allow for the correct color slash opaqueness in the material that I wanted and desired to actually come out in the final product. So in order to get a nice natural looking non-pattern look, after I added my couple different buckets, for like 4 to 8 ounces with like heavy pigment and added it into the bottom half-inch pour, I took a small wooden stick and kind of swirled it in randomized order to kind of give it a nice river looking design, which allowed it to not be, this very like patterned look. It was very natural and kind of randomized. So at this point, I used my heat gun and kind of went over the top of the pour, because at this point you're going to get bubbles coming up, because regardless of how good you did the mix and how good you did the pour, the mixing and then the actual pouring of the epoxy process is going to create bubbles. A lot of them are going to rise to the surface, and then you're going to be able to pop them with your heat gun or your torch. So after the first half-inch layer, I waited about 36 hours till pouring the clear, because what I wanted to do was make sure that first half-inch layer pour was pretty much solid. It was still tacky, and it still had some depressions in it if you were to pour something in it. But what I didn't want to happen was it to be viscous enough where if I poured a layer on top of it, it was actually going to go underneath and kind of distort that color. So like I said before, the top coat is about 1 inch thick, and it is totally clear, crystal clear, and the reason I wanted to do that was because I wanted to showcase the bark of this design. Now, I know a lot of people don't use the bark on their live edge river table projects because of structural integrity. Even though that was a thought, with the tabletop pour of the epoxy on top of it, it kind of binds it together, so I wasn't necessarily super worried about the structural integrity of the piece. So I wanted to really bring out the dark bark nature of this English walnut slab. To do that, I added that top inch pour of totally clear, so you can definitely see through and give that piece some nice depth. So after about 72 hours, I actually removed my whole project from the melamine form. To do that, you were able to rip out the sides and then take a wooden wedge it underneath the piece, and slowly work around the side to get everything kind of broken up, and then you're able to kind of take out the epoxy. There was some leakage on the back side of the epoxy. There was some voids that I filled in that actually went from the top to the bottom. So once it reached the bottom, since it wasn't necessarily a completely flat sealed layer, I guess, the epoxy kind of flowed and kind of spread out all over the bottom on one of the sides. That's not super, concerning to me, because we were going to sand it, make sure everything was nice and flat again before doing our flood coat. So if this happens to you, don't necessarily get too upset about it. Even if you got like the perfect melamine form that was sealed and everything else, the slab itself can be very porous, and if epoxy finds a hole, it's going to keep going on that hole until it gets to the bottom. So if this happens to you, don't get too concerned. Just know that's kind of just the nature of the wood that you're working with. After the epoxy project was taken out of the form, I put it up on some sawhorse stands and actually shone a light from the bottom just to see if I got my desired translucent versus opaqueness, and which I did. So my goal from that bottom layer was to get a nice semi-opaque color that didn't allow for, like if I stuck my hand under there, I didn't want to be able to see my hand, but I still wanted to be able to see light go through it, because we might be doing something with LEDs kind of shining through this. So I definitely wanted to make sure that was still an option, and make sure it wasn't translucent enough that if we actually did use LEDs, you'd actually see the LED strip. I definitely didn't want that to happen. And in this picture, you can actually see that not only did I do a big live edge slab pour, but I also did a tiny backsplash piece pour. And the cool thing about this piece is that it actually has the same lines that our big pour is going to do. So it's just scaled down. So the actual backsplash piece isn't just one straight line. It actually goes in the direction that our big pour does. So it starts out a little bit higher and then runs its river down through the bottom. So this is a kind of cool design that I knew that I wanted to do, because I figured that my desk was going to be against a wall, so I wanted to have something to kind of go up against it and not just have an abrupt finish. Thank you for watching this video. If you like the kind of content that I'm producing and are interested in seeing the next couple steps of this project, please like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications when my new videos are coming up, because I'm going to be doing, like I said, this is going to be the first part in a couple part series that goes through this project specifically, and then I have a couple other projects in the works, so stay tuned and thank you for watching.